So I'm here today to interview you for our new magazine, which we're hopefully introducing in the next month or so.
Good.
But I want to hear more about the Chestnut Tree because I know that you're well involved in that. So tell us more about your role. Thank you for coming along today.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me. Well, I think the title that I have is chairman, but I'm actually a volunteer along with about 1,200 other volunteers across both Chestnut Tree and St Barnabas.
Wow, that's quite a lot, isn't it?
It is a lot, and it's very, very important that we have volunteers. I think without going into too many figures, but if we didn't have the volunteers giving up the time that they do, then it would cost us most probably around about £1.6 million to pay the people to actually do the work that they do. And a lot of these volunteers are religious. They give up their time. And of course, volunteering isn't just like myself as a trustee. It's anything from helping in the kitchen, to the garden, to housework, to anything. So it's a very, very important role for the actual charity itself. And we're constantly looking for new people to come along. If anybody is interested in becoming a volunteer, then by all means get in touch with Chestnut Tree through the website, and I'm sure they'd be more than happy to take you on board.
Okay, and what does your role actually entail?
Well, the Chestnut Tree is a charity, so it's got a lot of governance behind it. You'll have seen in the press only recently some of the big charities have to be very careful about what they do. And as a trustee, we're there to make sure that the money that the supporters give to the charity is well spent, that is put to the right causes. We make sure that the management team conform to the governance that's the guidelines from the Charity Commission. We're there to give a little bit of advice as well, because we have about 15 people who sit on the board as trustees, and they come from all walks of life. So we have some financial people from the accountancy, some legal people, people who are linked to the NHS, because of course, whilst we are a charity, we're very much reliant on some of the people that we look after coming through the NHS system. So our main role is to make sure that the charity is run properly. It provides the services that are required by the people who need them, but also to look at innovation about what the next generation of services that we provide are required. Children's needs these days, people with life-limiting illnesses, are becoming a lot more complex, and we need to make sure that we have the right staff and the right technology to look after those children. Maybe 15 years ago, it's the 15th anniversary of Chestnut Tree this year.
Wow.
And when it opened 15 years ago, we were looking after children predominantly who had cancer type illnesses, and of course that's changed a great deal now. So the role is very much a governance role, a supportive role, and it's very much along the lines of all the other volunteers that are there.
So how do you actually fit this in, Derwyn, alongside your family life and your full-time job?
With great difficulty, but I try and find the balance, because it's an important role for me. It's I say it in great honesty that it's an honour and a privilege to be part of such a great organisation. And putting aside titles and so forth, I'm just a member of the team who can provide input to a charity that is providing some fantastic care for these children. Yes, it is difficult at times, but I try and balance the work-life load. I'm sort of fortunate that I have children that are grown up, but also it's important that my wife's involved. So she's a volunteer in Chestnut Tree as well, so she understands why I do it. She spends 2 days a week there herself.
Okay.
And the amount of time that I give really is dependent on what I can give. You know, the expectations of the charity are, again, as a volunteer, they're grateful for what I can give. But it is a rewarding role. It's not all about giving. I always say to people, if anybody listening to this has never been to Chestnut Tree, then please go there. It's the most humbling experience of your life.
I absolutely agree. You know, it really is actually, isn't it?
Yeah, and it suddenly puts your life into perspective. when all the worries and concerns and issues that you have suddenly come into relevance, and you realise that perhaps we're a little bit luckier than we think.
Tell us more about the charity itself. What does the Chestnut Tree do?
Well, as I say, it started 15 years ago. It's one of the only, it's the only children's hospice. And the word hospice is a little bit misleading sometimes. We don't like using the word. It's the only children's house within Sussex. There are about 40 children's hospices across the UK, and Chestnut Tree provides specialist care for children with life-limiting illnesses. But more importantly, what people don't realise is that those children who have those illnesses have siblings and parents and grandparents, and for them it's also a challenge looking after them. So whilst we provide overnight and day care for the children themselves, whether they have ventilation problems, whether they have cardiac problems, we also provide respite so the mum and dad and the siblings can spend some quality time together. Quite often we get parents who bring their children in, and when they drop them off for the day, you'd expect them to go off maybe on a day's outing somewhere. Many of the parents just go upstairs to the bedrooms that we have there and just read a book.
Mm-hmm.
They can have time to themselves, rather than it's not about going shopping, it's not about going on holidays, it's having quality time with the other siblings as well. So I think it's a combination of providing the palliative care, the specialist care for the children themselves, along with making sure that the parents, the siblings, and the extended family get some quality time alone themselves.
Yeah, that's pretty magical, isn't it, really?
It
That's
absolutely
that's
is.
amazing.
We just don't realise the strain and the stresses that go through the family when you're looking after a child like that. It's very, very important that the family do spend time together, not just with the child who's ill, but also the rest of the siblings as well.
Fantastic. And let's talk about fundraising then, and how do you raise money, and how much money does the charity need, and where does your money come from? Are you government funded?
Well, I'd love to answer the last question, so yes, but I'm afraid that's not the case. The charity itself costs about £3.5 million a year.
Wow.
That's just in the care and the medical care that we provide to run the whole charity. Unfortunately, about £250,000, so it's about 6% of that fund comes from the government, or external funding. The other £3.25 million comes from people like yourself, real important fundraisers who go out there and do anything for us, and fundraising can be anything from some of the things that you've done, the Cambodia, the India walk, the China walk. I think we're doing India this year and Peru next year, but right the way down to collecting with buckets. At Christmas time we have people who just walk around going to bonfire exhibitions, or we've got events coming up this year. Some of the events we've got is that we're very fortunate that our president is Lord Henry, who's the Duke of Norfolk's son. So we're going to abseil down the side of Arundel Castle. In fact, we're abseiling. Some people are abseiling down the Spinnacle Tower in Portsmouth.
Yeah, I've heard of that one before. Are you doing it?
Unfortunately, due to a few illnesses, which I've just suddenly found, I'm not going to, They may not be real illnesses, but I've made them up just in case. But it is anything, we run marathons, races, 10Ks, and there's some extreme cases as well of people who are doing silly things. I think a group of people did a mud run the other day.
Oh God.
You can imagine. But then there's the other things, that people just raise a small amount of money through baking cakes. But the important thing is that every penny makes a difference. A lot of people think that the donations that we get are large, big sums of money from corporates. It's not. About 80%, 90% of the income that we get come from people like yourself who raise, a nominal sum of money, but it's so important. And we can't stop doing it. And every year the care costs keep on rising. So every year we've got to come up with new innovative ideas to raise the much needed funds.
And I'll tell you what, it doesn't feel like a nominal amount of money when you're actually out there fundraising it, which shows actually how much you need, because I've probably raised 6,000 for the charity, maybe more, probably 7,000 for the charity, and feel like that's a huge amount of money, but then realise it's just such a drop in the ocean, you know. Even when we've done the trips like Cambodia and China, and then they say, you know, collectively we've raised enough money to keep the hospice going for a week or something like that, and you think, you know, I know a week's a long time, but it's not a long time, and you think just that one trip where we've all been out there trudging and, you know, killing ourselves, it's only actually made a difference for a week. You know?
But the important thing is that it's made a difference, and that's the key thing. You know, we must never underestimate the fact that, you know, if you look at the £6,000-ish that you've raised, that on one hand it's great because £6,000 is a lot of money, but when you put it into perspective over the 2.5 years or 3 years that you've been fundraising, that £6,000 pays for almost probably less than 1 day's care. So out of 1,000 days, it's less than 1 day, but it's important. And
well, yes, because they're cumulative, you know,
you know, we just need more and more people. We can never have enough people, and whether it's £5, £500 or 5,000, it all makes a difference.
It all adds up, doesn't it? You know, and that's the point. It does all add up,
yeah.
Which is great. So, and there's a link with St Barnabas as well, you know. So tell us more about that.
Well, the charity is actually St Barnabas Hospices, and there are 2 hospices. There's the house, which is, as we talk about, Chestnut Tree, which is the children's element, and then we have an adult hospice as well in Worthing. The adult hospice was first formed 43 years ago now, and we moved to the new premises in Titnall Lane about 7 years ago. It's a 20-bed end-of-life care. It's slightly different to the Chestnut Tree. And again, a lot of people who associate hospices would associate it with what St Barnabas is about. It's the provision of palliative care, end-of-life care for those people who are coming to the end of their illnesses. Completely different to Chestnut Tree. You know, St Barnabas is very much a more clinical organisation. It's a lot more less buoyant and fun-loving as opposed to Chestnut Tree. But we have 20 beds there. Again, that's funded predominantly by the fundraisers in and around the Worthing area. And we've been, you know, we look after anything from about 1,000 people a year going through there.
Wow, that's a lot of people.
Provide end-of-life care
for
them. It's a very rewarding knowledge. It's knowledge. It's rewarding to know that you can spend your last days being well looked after, being given some of the best care in the country. And of course, we know that unfortunately the NHS sometimes can't provide that. So it's an important part of the community. Unlike Chestnut Tree, which serves the whole of Sussex, St Barnabas is very much a Worthing-centric. So it supports anything from the edges of Arundel up to Henfield, Storrington, and across to about Portslade area there. So it's again another important part of the overall charity ethos.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for coming in today and telling us more about it. And hopefully that will, just raise the awareness of the charity, to the local community a little bit as well. So thank you very much, Derwyn.
My pleasure, and thank you for everything you've done. Thank you.